East Idaho Newsmakers is brought to you by the Bank of Commerce, your bank of a lifetime.
This is East Idaho Newsmakers with Nate Eaton.
Welcome to East Idaho Newsmakers. You have probably heard the news by now that Porter's Craft and Frame is closing its doors after more than a century, right?
Well, as a craft store, probably substantially less than that, but since a continuous business since 1917.
1917.
Well, actually earlier than that, but in the location in Rexburg since 1917.
Well, it's definitely a legacy business, and we have Chuck Porter here with us to talk about that and to kind of talk about the history of the business. Now, this has been in your family for forever.
Well, it seems that way.
Yeah. How did Porter's start?
Well, it's the story is, most of the people are dead that can verify all of the things about it. But my grandfather was he went to Rexburg to teach at Rick's Academy, and he was interested in the newspaper business, and he bought a newspaper, which is the Rexburg Current Journal at the time. And he bought that in 1907. He and some partners, he bought the partners out. But there was a small bookstore located a couple of doors away, and he actually stopped in the bookstore one day to sell them an ad. And there was the sheriff was there with a creditor, and he kind of walked in on this scene. And in the process of working it out, he helped the bookstore owner work out of the problem, but he also ended up owning the bookstore, and that's true. And there's some little steps in between, but all of them we're not certain of them. But he ended up owning the bookstore, and that was in 1916. He was part of the development on College Avenue, where they built College Avenue. They started building it in 1915, and they finished the project of putting the street in and putting the hotel in and putting the building we're in. And there were 6 storefronts in the building we were in. And my grandfather had one storefront, and his plan was, which he did, he put the small bookstore in the front, and he had his newspaper and printing business in the back. And he operated that way he moved in 1917, December of 1917. And he operated that in that one storefront until after World War II. And he had a large family, and everybody worked in the business. He had 3 sons and 7 daughters, and the daughters, a few of the daughters became printers as well. A couple of them did. One in particular became a printer, but the sons were all printers, and the daughters tended to work in the store.
So he was producing the newspaper and running the store at the same time with all the kids.
Yeah, there were 2 newspapers in Rexburg at that time. They were both weeklies, and one was on Tuesday and one was on Thursday, and they used to get in controversies. They would actually kind of sometimes cook up a controversy.
Imagine that, the media doing that.
Yeah, anyway, and then everybody subscribed to both of them so they could see how they would answer each other back and forth. But anyway, after World War II, he was in his 70s. My dad had just come home from the Army. Another uncle came home from the Army, and there were some ways it worked out, but my dad was the youngest of the 3 sons, and he ended up buying the store from my grandfather so he could be on his own, but his 2 brothers had the newspaper and printing business. His 2 older brothers bought those, and he continued working for his brothers as a printer at night, and then he would run the store during the day, and he had just this one little bookstore, and he had stationery and some other things in there too. And but he had to expand, and he knew that, and so he got the storefront next door, and he put in a Ben Franklin variety store. So he had 2 storefronts out of the 6 that are there, and he had bookstore, stationery store on one side, and on the other side he had a Ben Franklin variety, and then in the basement, the downstairs, he put in a Toyland. And people still remember that Toyland. But anyway, all the time I grew up, that was the size of the store. And the part of the printing business stayed in the back of the store all that time. And so behind the store, and if you look on the parking lot behind our store, you can see there's part of it juts out. And the reason it juts out, and there's been an addition put on the building, is that's where the printing business was.
Okay, so did,
And my uncle was there, and so my cousins, I grew up with my cousins, they worked in the printing business, so I worked in this. Myself, my two brothers, we all worked there together. 1966, they moved out. My uncle decided to experiment with the mail order wedding announcement business, and it exploded on him, and so he moved out in 1966. So that gave my dad the chance to move back and take over that part of it.
okay, so is that where the printing, or Porter's office, did that?
No,
okay.
no, that's Artco.
Oh.
North of town, that became Artco.
Okay.
His name was Art Porter. And
Interesting.
So Artco was what that became.
And is he still running that, or has that been sold?
No, the family, of course, he's passed away a long time ago. But the family sold that out in 1986 to Tater Corp, and so that's not part of the family anymore. The newspaper sold. I had another uncle who had the newspaper, and he combined the two. He ended up with both newspapers in town, and he combined the two, and that's where the Rexburg Standard-Journal came from. And my dad, I guess, is the original, and my cousins sold that, it's been 10, 15 years ago.
Your family has really, I did not know all that, has really been pioneers in Rexburg. I mean, those are some legacy businesses and a newspaper. I mean, that's impressive.
Well, thanks. But I was always in the store. I grew up in the store, and we left for a while, and I came, my dad, I'd always shown an interest in the store, and probably more so than my siblings, but all of us worked in the store. But I came in my 30s. My dad was insistent that he felt like he'd just gone into stores. He'd gone into the family business without giving life a chance, and he was adamant that we all graduate from college. And so at every crossroads in my life, I went to my dad and said, "What about now?" And he'd say, "No, you better do something else. You better follow what you did." So I got a degree. I got a master's degree in engineering, and I was an engineer in Los Angeles in the aerospace industry. And then a couple of guys in my engineering group went to law school at night, and I thought that was kind of a good idea. So I signed up for law school, and I became a patent attorney in Los Angeles for a while. But when my dad was in the flood took a lot. We talk about Rexburg, it's like the Old Testament. There's two parts to it. There's before the flood and after the flood. And anyway.
Did the flood impact Porter's?
Well, the flood took a lot out of my dad's. It just tired him out, and it was hard on his health. And a couple of years after the flood, he came to me and he said, "If you want to come in, you better come in now." And I was 34 years old. But I came in. My wife joined me immediately, and we'd been running. My dad stayed active in the business, and he stayed active with the office supply side of it, and he liked that. And so it was kind of its own life inside of we were all in the same building. And meanwhile, we had kept buying more storefronts. And then my wife and I bought the last 2 storefronts in that building in 1990. So we occupy the whole building now. And some people looking at some might get the idea that we owned the old building from the beginning, but we didn't. We just had one section, and we just kept adding on. And each one of those sections was individually owned by other owners, and we just kept taking over more and more until we take the whole building.
So you got a master's in engineering, then you went to law school and practiced patent. You were a patent attorney in LA.
Yeah.
The flood comes. Your dad says, "I'm ready for your help."
Yeah.
You move back to Rexburg with your wife, and you.
I actually practiced law for a little while in Rexburg as well.
Wow.
But not very long. And then that's when my dad came. I actually moved back first and practiced general law for just a little over a year. And then that's when I was considering going back to Los Angeles, and my old employer had called several times, and I was considering going back. And then my dad came to me and asked me if I would come in at that point, or he says, "Or I might have to do something that will make it so you can't come in." And so that's when I went in.
When did you open up the location in Idaho Falls?
1994. September of 94. We signed the contract and everything to have the building built for us in 93, but we didn't get everything done until '94.
Was there ever thought to expand to Pocatello or up north to open more stores?
Well, the way we operate, that would have been difficult. It would have been fun to do, but we had our hands full with what we had with Rexburg. Now, there's a Ben Franklin store. My dad had, I mentioned, he had Ben Franklin variety stores, and Ben Franklin pointed us towards, if you wanted to do well, the variety business wasn't going to flourish, and that you ought to consider going. They pushed us towards crafts, and that's how we became a craft store. We followed that format. But when we moved to Idaho Falls, there was already a Ben Franklin store here, and so we dropped out of the Ben Franklin program. But we still continued with one Ben Franklin variety store that we had in St. Anthony, and we kept that going until 2000. Business just kept dropping and dropping, so we closed that store and sold the building in about 2000. So we just operated with crafts and frames. The office supply business, about that same time, the office supply business had become its own world even more and more with the commercial, and it was a whole different culture. So we moved them out and sold them to my son. My oldest son had an interest in that. He didn't care much for the craft business, but he liked the office supply business and the systems and the delivery systems and all that. That's very tech oriented, and he really liked that. He wasn't as interested in merchandise. My wife and I both really like merchandise. We just like new gizmos. Things like that. That's a lot of fun.
And Ben Franklin, from it's still around in the country, right?
No.
Oh, no. Okay.
No, Ben Franklin, they ended up going away. There's still people using this name, Ben Franklin.
Oh, they're using the name.
But they're just using the name. They pay something, and we did that too. There's other places to buy the merchandise from, but Ben Franklin as a franchise doesn't exist anymore. And it was a powerful franchise for many years. I don't know. There's lots of reasons why it ended up going away, but there were Ben Franklin stores everywhere. At one time they had 3,000 stores, and they were all franchises. Some people would have multiples. My dad had two. And he had a third one for a while. He and my brother shared one for a while, but that one, we sold that one. And so that's our history. You think about it, Walmart started out as Ben Franklin stores.
I did not know that either. Wow.
Yeah.
Look what they've become.
Sam Walton got up to 20-something stores, and then he started opening these Walmart centers.
Did you ever think, Ben Franklin was pushing you toward the craft segment? Did you ever think of maybe expanding that out? I guess you started with that as a variety store.
Yeah.
But that proved to be the niche to go into for you guys?
Well, it was. That was the easiest thing we could manage, and even within that, you can be a lot of different things. Like fabric became our number. A lot of craft stores don't carry fabric at all. You were seeing that more and more. They are now, but our fabric was really a strong department for ours. Even when we were just a variety store, fabric was very strong. We had fabric in the basement of the Rexburg store before we bought the last two storefronts. We had fabric was downstairs, and we went through. Linda and I went through a lot of iterations of what we did. We got into the apparel business for a while. We were pretty heavy in juniors and missies and children's clothes. But we just said we got to simplify this. This is getting a little out of hand, and so we went out of the clothing business. We stayed with the stationery and office supplies. We stayed with the books. We stayed with books until 2006 before we finally dropped out of books. But we always had a bookstore, and some of the old timers still call us Porter's Bookstore. There's no books.
No books, but still a bookstore.
Well, I got a call. I'll tell you the story. I got a call from the Chamber of Commerce here just a few years ago, and they were just updating their records, and they went through all of the categories we sell now, and they got to books, and I said, "We don't carry books." And she says, "You don't carry books anymore?" And I said, "Well, you haven't been in here for a while, have you?" And And she said, well, I'm in there all the time, but I go right to the fabric department. And I said, well, that's why we don't carry books anymore.
Right, there you go. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about why you're deciding to retire and close down the stores, and also if the internet has impacted your company. So we'll be right back with Chuck Porter.
At the Bank of Commerce, we understand the hard work, determination, and sacrifice it takes to run a successful business. That's why we're here every step of the way to help make your dreams come true. The Bank of Commerce, your bank of a lifetime.
Today we are talking with Chuck Porter, the owner of Porter's Craft and Frame, and formerly Books, but no longer Books. Chuck and his wife Linda recently announced that after a long time, Porter's will be closing. Was that a hard decision to make, or were you ready?
Well, I think we were more ready than we thought. The first question we get from a lot of people is, why didn't you just sell it to somebody else to operate it? And you know, our locations are both good locations. It'll be easy for us to rent them. We own the buildings, and so. But as far as selling what we're doing there, we're doing a lot of things that are sort of unique. It would be hard to find. I brought a young man in who had worked for me all the time. He was right out of high school. He worked for me all the time. He went to BYU, Idaho, and he graduated. And he stayed in the industry. He left and worked with a buying group that we were associated with and things like that. But he contacted me and said he'd be interested in coming in with the idea that he would eventually buy us out. And he's been with us for 4 years, and he finally said, you know, this is so much of your personality. These stores are so much of your personality and what you do. That he says he's also very tech. He's really into tech, high-tech things, and he's kept us really abreast of what's going on, you know, how to keep track of our data, our order, and kept us abreast of all of the technical things that are involved with retailing now. But he said, I'm going to move on. And Linda she'd always said to me, she says, how are we going to get out of this? Or how are we going to end this? And she's not get out so much, but my wife really likes the business. Really likes it as well. And she said, but how are we going to end this? And I said, I don't know. But I said, the minute we start talking about it, it'll go real fast. Because once you let that into your mind, then pretty soon things start to work really fast that way. It was like opening the Idaho Falls store. We hadn't considered it, but as soon as we thought about it, then it went really fast. That's the way it seems to work.
So when did you start talking about it?
January 1st.
Of this year?
Of this year.
2.5 months ago?
2.5 months ago. We had never even considered it. She went off to a merchandise show, and before we left, we started talking just before she left. And the more I thought about it, I called her at the merchandise show, and I said, you know, we better talk about this, but maybe you ought to come home. Let's talk about whether or not we ought to close the stores right away. And that way, if we close now, it'll give somebody who wants to lease if we get our tenant lined up, they'll be able to get in and get going for fourth quarter. And so that's when we started.
So January 1st?
Well, the first week of January.
When did you decide, okay, we're going to pull the trigger and tell the employees and send out, you know, the postcards? And
that was about then. We contacted some other. We have lots of contact. Over the years, we've got a great support system where we talk to a lot of other people in the country that operate stores similar to ours. We belong to a buying group, and so we have had a lot of friends who've ended their businesses. So we just made a few calls and started talking to some people, and actually traveled and visited some other people that have how they've run their going out of business sales and how they do it and how to come out the best and how to sell everything off. And so we just put together a program. Now, the young man I told you about that had decided he was going to leave, he's staying with us through this, and he really likes doing this kind of thing. It's a great project for him. He likes projects, and he's running the show. He's running the show right now as far as our closeout's going.
You're doing your own liquidation. A lot of companies will hire that out, but you're doing it all.
We're doing it all.
Is there a projected end date?
It takes typically 14 weeks for a store our size to go out, so we're looking at the first part of June. is when we'll finally be done.
Does it seem real?
It seems surreal. It's very strange. My wife says we're having a hard time getting used to it. I mean, this has been my life, and this is our lives. And I mean, we can't walk into another store without taking notes of what they're doing and looking at ideas and writing down sources. And it's just fun. It's really fun. And you go to a lot of merchandise shows and we'll walk and see things that'll be great. I mean, retail is a rush the way we do it. It's a real rush. You know, you get on top of trends. A few years ago, we got into. Some of your listeners might be familiar with a few years ago that in this area, and it was pretty much in this area and it stretched into Utah a little bit, but it was primarily right here in this southeast Idaho corner. This fad got going of making watches with beads, bead bracelet watches, and you'd buy the. Anyway, that was huge for us, and it was fun to call up a supplier and say, "Give me 2,000 watch faces,"
and order 5 million beads.
And this last year, we were back in the East Coast with a supplier, and we heard about this craze that was just hitting the East Coast. It was just hitting it like going gangbusters with these fidget spinners. And so we thought, what do you know? So we lined up the sources and started ordering fidget spinners. And we were there were actually a couple of places in Idaho Falls that had them, but they weren't having. They didn't have them in the quantities we were buying them, and we just loaded them in deep to see what we can do. And we sold 34,000 of them in 60 days.
Holy smokes! Wow!
But what was amazing was when that ended. It was completely dropped off.
And now do you have a 5,000 hanging around your stores?
No, I got a lot more than 5,000. But it's okay.
Yeah. You sold 34.
Sold 34, and it was still a success if we take the rest of them out and throw them in the river. We're fine. But we're trying to sell them for $1 a piece right now, and we can't get that out of them.
Well, maybe we should do a contest to give them away. So have you ever been on the tail end of a trend, where you come in a little bit too late and you're stuck with all this?
Well, I think, sure, but it's more fun to be on the front end, and those are the things I remember. I don't remember much negative stuff.
You do? Well, that's good.
I don't remember much negative stuff. I remember one of the things about knowing a lot of people in the country is you find out trends early. Somebody's picked up on it early. And you can share information. Sometimes we've been the early ones to pick up on it. We've shared it with our people in our buying group and so on. But I can't really think, we've hung on too long before. We've hung on too long with things and that haven't worked out. But at the same time, I think we've been in on the front end of most of them.
That's the way to do it.
And where it's really fun is when the bigger change sometimes takes a while for them to get onto it, and so we can move really fast, and when you're the only one out there and people are coming in and say, "We heard you got this," and,
you gotta love that.
Yeah.
How have the bigger chains, the Hobby Lobbies, the Michaels, and the internet impacted porters?
Well, the chain stores always impact you. And your only chance of surviving against that, they're just by their presence, people come into the area and they automatically trust the brands they know first. It used to be, our Rexburg store in particular, it used to be when students would come from Rick's College, years ago, the first thing they'd do is go downtown and explore the stores downtown. And so we get a lot of students. Now it takes us a while before the students find us. They come to town, they come from communities that are dominated by chains. And so the first place they go are the names they know, and Walmart being the biggest one now. But your best, if you want to thrive in the retail business, there's still a lot of opportunities. But you have to find something that's unique that only you do. And that's one of the things we feel really badly about about closing down right now. But we actually had a nice increase last year. We had a nice increase, but this is a good time to go just because I'm in my 70s and I don't dare say how old my wife is, but this is just a good time for us to go. But there's a lot of programs. There are a lot of programs that we run that no one else in our area are doing. And we got the what we call our Hemstitch program, which is a powerful program. And that when we started the sale, those Hemstitch kits started flying out. But it's something that you can't just go out and buy. There are probably a lot of little things. We do a cuddle fleece program that's extremely strong for us in our fabric area. In our quilting, we emphasize the quilting. We buy the quilting fabrics we buy are the name brand ones, which are written up in all the quilting magazines and things like that. So we got some unique things. When we go head to head with the chains, we're just another one out there, and it doesn't. I don't say that it fails, but it doesn't do very well if you're just another person doing it. But if you've got something that's unique, what you're doing, you have an edge, particularly when it resonates with your customers. Now, we've tried a lot of things to make us unique that didn't resonate.
Didn't work. I've heard other people in similar situations say, it's hard to go, but sometimes what's harder is the reaction of the customers when they see you and say, "Oh, we're going to miss you," and "Oh, we can't." Is that hard to have people come up and tell you those things?
Well, it's terrible. I mean, is it hard for me? It's really hard. I sat down and wrote some of my thoughts about it, and I thought, well, it's a little bit maudlin, so I didn't. I was going to put it on my Facebook page, but I didn't. Probably a little bit maudlin, but I just think about all of the people I see over the years. Now, there's a lady. Yesterday, I stopped in my store. Was walking through this store in Rexburg, and I stopped and I talked to a lady. Now, this is a lady that's been shopping me since I started. And she's probably about my age, and everything she's bought, everything we ever carried. When we had kids' clothes, she bought kids' clothes from us. When we had toy, well, we were back in the toy business again. But before we went out, she was a great toy customer. She raised her family. Now she's buying frames she was in buying frames. So I just stopped and talked to her, and I'd never done that before. But I recognized her, and she recognized me from just being in the store. And I said, you've shopped me for years and years since you came to Rexburg. Her husband's a college professor, and she's young. I've been shopping here ever since I came to Rexburg. And then she said how much she would miss us and how much she'd miss the store. And I'm glad I stopped and talked to her, but those are things I'm really going to miss, or just the people we saw on a regular basis in the stores. And we won't see them as much anymore. We'll see them in the community, but not as much as we used to. We feel badly about that. But
what's next for Chuck and Linda?
Well, we got grandkids. My wife, originally Linda was scheduled to be here, but she's with grandkids today in Arizona. So she wants to spend more time traveling to see their kids. We're both really active in our church. We both work in our temple, in the local temple in Rexburg, and there's I don't know, actually, on a lot of things. I don't know. I've still got the buildings to manage and to rent and things like that.
Have you announced if anyone's taken them over yet?
What?
Your buildings?
Well, we haven't got anything signed. We've got a lot of interest in them,
okay.
But we haven't got anything signed, so I don't dare say anything.
Not a problem, understandable.
But we've got, and if we don't get something signed, I'm afraid my employees or people are coming in and offering my employees jobs and things like that. I might not have enough people there to finish up, but actually I don't think so. But I hope to get that taken care of here in a short while. But I'm actually not worried about it at all. But
what do you and Linda want to be remembered for?
Well, I don't know. I guess it's like a friend of mine said when you die, people only remember you for 2 weeks. You probably will be remembered for a while, but you know, we might last longer than 2 weeks. But I think I look at all, when we started in business, in fact, as recently as 20 years ago, downtown was full of Rexburg, or in downtown Rexburg was full of good retailers. You know, we had 3 men's stores, we had several women, we had 5 or 6 women's clothing stores, we had 3 drugstores all in downtown. Now, there still are businesses in downtown, but not as big and not as many as there were. And people still remember them and remember how nice it was to go in there and talk to them. And I think, you know, Saturday I was home, and Linda went down to the store to get something out of her office to come back home. She didn't come home. She didn't come home all for the whole afternoon. And so when she finally did get home, I said, "What happened to you?" And she says, "It was one person after another that I was talking to." And she said, "I just stayed there and talked to people." And she said, so if what people remember is, I hope they remember that we appreciated them. We appreciated them, and we appreciated the relationships we had with all the way around, with the customers, particularly with the customers, but also with our employees. We want to be remembered as being positive influences in their lives, and even with our suppliers, you know. So that's what I would say we'd want to be remembered for.
There's a lot of people that are going to remember Porters, remember Chuck and Linda, and we wish you the best. We thank you for the service you've done to the community for decades and decades, and we look forward to seeing what's next. The sale will run through the end of June unless everything sells out.
Mid-June.
Mid-June, so you can head to the Porters in Rexburg or in Idaho Falls. That sale is still going on, and you might get a chance to see Chuck and Linda personally if you're there at the right time. Good luck to you, Chuck.
Thank you.
And send our best to your wife. Thank you for watching. Have a good week.
East Idaho Newsmakers is brought to you by the Bank of Commerce, your bank of a lifetime.